Chapter 9. Meeting the Clan Heads. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the Hidden Leaf Village as the school day finally came to a close. I stood outside the academy entrance, a quiet smile on my face as I watched the parents begin to arrive. The academy grounds were bustling with life as families gathered to pick up their children, eager to hear about the day's events. Irika stood beside me, arms crossed, his usual warm expression a bit more reserved than usual. I could tell he was still thinking about the events of the day. His gaze flickered toward the students as they met up with their parents, and his eyes softened when he spotted Naruto walking home alone. "Looks like they're all getting along, huh?" I said, breaking the silence. Irika chuckled, but it was clear he was still processing the chaotic day. "Yeah, but I still don't know how you managed to put them through all that and still get them excited to come back for more." I grinned. "It's all about giving them purpose. The gauntlet was just the beginning." Irika's chuckle deepened. "I think you broke them, but you're right. They'll be better for it." The soft thud of footsteps reached my ears, and I turned to see a group of figures approaching. I could already sense who they were before their presence became apparent: clan heads. The leaders of the most powerful clans in the village, each one with their own aura of authority, their gazes sharp and calculating. It wasn't uncommon for the clan heads to visit the academy, especially after important events like today's training. They would want to hear from their children how they had fared in the new teacher's challenges. I wasn't surprised by their appearance, but I couldn't deny the underlying tension that crept in whenever their eyes were on me. Shikamaru, his face as lazy as ever, was walking alongside his father, Shikaku Nara. The older man's eyes were sharp, not unlike his son's, but with an experience that had seen far more in the world than any of the students here would ever understand. As they approached, I heard Shikamaru muttering something under his breath. "Shido-sensei is a slave driver," he said, his voice low enough that only those near him could hear. I couldn't help but chuckle to myself, amused by his bluntness. It seemed that my methods of pushing the students had already reached his ears. But then again, I never expected them to be anything less than honest, especially with how difficult the gauntlet had been. Shikamaru's voice grew quieter as I closed the distance, and I finally approached him and his father with a grin. "Did I hear that correctly, Shikamaru?" I asked playfully, arching an eyebrow. Shikamaru looked up at me in surprise, his usual bored expression faltering for a moment. He quickly recovered, though, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "You heard right, Sensei. You really pushed us today." Shikaku Nara chuckled softly, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. His eyes, however, were studying me, a hint of curiosity flickering in them. I extended my hand with a warm smile. "I'm Tendashin Shido," I said, introducing myself to Shikaku. "I'm the new teacher for your son's class." Shikaku's sharp eyes never left mine as he grasped my hand firmly, a quiet assessment in his gaze. "I've heard a lot about you," he said with a knowing smile. "Though I've yet to hear about this gauntlet you've put the students through." I could feel the weight of the other clan heads, even though they hadn't stepped forward yet. They were all listening in, intrigued by the new teacher who had already captured their children's attention. I could see their eyes darting subtly in my direction as I spoke to Shikaku. They were observing, waiting for me to reveal more. I hesitated for a moment, looking away as I thought about how best to explain. "I made a few changes to the curriculum," I said quietly, my tone shifting from playful to thoughtful. "The gauntlet isn't just a physical test. It's about pushing the students to their limits, forcing them to face things they might not be ready for. But that's how you make a ninja. If you coddle them, if you let them get complacent, they'll never rise to the challenges they'll face in the real world." Shikaku raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. The other clan heads, who had been keeping their distance, were now leaning in slightly, curious to hear more. I knew they were listening carefully, analyzing my every word. "A teacher's role," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "is to ensure that their students are equipped with the necessary tools to face the world. If a teacher is unable to see the potential in their students and disregards their needs, then they've failed in their purpose. They've failed the next generation of ninjas." My gaze shifted over the clan heads, one by one. Their faces became a little more guarded. They could feel the weight of my words, the sincerity behind them. It wasn't a threat, but there was a certain gravity to it. And then, just as I said that, my tone shifted. "How can we expect anyone to grow without trust and guidance?" I said, my voice turning more intense. My yellow eyes, usually dull in the daylight, began to glow faintly with a golden hue, an undeniable sense of power radiating from me. The atmosphere shifted. Suddenly, the air felt thick with an almost tangible pressure. The clan heads stiffened, their expressions faltering for just a moment. I let the silence stretch for a few beats, watching them carefully as the weight of my words settled in. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the pressure vanished. My expression lightened, and I smiled brightly, my usual friendly demeanor returning in an instant. "Well, don't all the clan heads agree?" I asked cheerfully, as if the last few moments hadn't happened at all. The other clan heads stiffened, a few averting their gazes or coughing awkwardly. They hadn't expected that sudden shift in my presence. Some of them were clearly caught off guard, their ears a little red from being caught listening in on something that was perhaps more than they had bargained for. Shikaku, though, looked a little taken aback. I noticed his eyes widen ever so slightly before he masked his surprise with a thoughtful expression. "You really are passionate about this," Shikaku said, his voice tinged with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "It's good to see that the next generation has teachers like you and Irika. We need more like you in this village." I couldn't help but chuckle, feeling the tension ease. "I appreciate that, Shikaku. It's a tough job, but someone has to do it right." Shikaku smiled warmly and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Well, I'm thankful for what you do. Keep it up, Shido." With that, he turned to Shikamaru and gave him a nod, signaling it was time to go. The other clan heads, after a moment of quiet deliberation, began to gather their children, quietly making their farewells. Their gazes lingered on me for a moment longer, as if weighing something unknown. Some were more obvious with their curiosity, while others were more reserved, but they all seemed to share the same thought. Who was this man, and what made him so different? With that, the academy grounds began to empty, and the day drew to a close. I looked at the clock. It was just past 4 p.m. The last of the parents had left, and I turned to Irika, who was standing a little farther back, watching the scene unfold with a quiet smile on his face. "I guess that's it for today," I said, giving him a wave. "I'll see you tomorrow, Irika." He waved back, still a little amused by the whole ordeal. "Take care, Shido." I used the body flicker technique to leave, a swirl of leaves marking my departure. I arrived home in a blink, stepping into the cool quiet of my house. It was only natural for the clan heads to take an interest in me. After all, I was the one teaching their children. But I couldn't let that distract me. There was still more work to be done. As I hummed to myself, I made my way to my secret basement, ready to train. The gauntlet had just begun, and I was going to make sure I was ready for everything that came next. Chapter 10, Test A. It's hard to believe it's already been a year. The time had passed so quickly, it felt like just yesterday I had walked into this academy, meeting Irika and taking on my first class. Now, after a full year of grueling training, I stood at the edge of the training grounds, watching my students prepare for the final test of the semester. The gauntlet had become a regular part of our routine, running it twice a week, each time more challenging than the last. Over the course of this year, my students had grown in ways that impressed even me. From stealth maneuvers to hand seals, from survival tactics to communication skills, they had absorbed everything like sponges. But the gauntlet had become the ultimate test of their progress. Today, they had to finish in under 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Over the year, they have reached new scores. The fastest was Sasuke with 3 minutes and 47 seconds, and the slowest was Ino and Sakura, just under 4 minutes and 45 seconds. Their teamwork was unrefined, their skills still raw. But now, a year later, the changes were noticeable. Their movements were faster, sharper, and more in sync. Their skills had grown by leaps and bounds. As the class gathered in the training grounds, I couldn't help but feel proud. The energy was different today. There was determination in their eyes. It was a reflection of all the hard work they had put in. As they lined up, Irika stood beside me, ready to oversee the event, clipboard in hand. "All right, everyone," I called out, my voice cutting through the air. "You all know the drill. Complete the gauntlet in under 3 minutes and 30 seconds, and you're done. There's only one way to do this. Give it everything you've got. Understood?" "Yes, Sensei," they chorused. I gave them all an encouraging smile and waved my hand. "Start when ready." One by one, the students took their turns running through the gauntlet. The changes from last year were astounding. Their movements were fluid and efficient, each one pushing themselves to their limits. Kiba was first up, and his time was down to 2 minutes and 34 seconds. His earlier roughness had been smoothed out by his focus and agility. Next was Hinata, who, though usually quiet, demonstrated an impressive amount of speed and precision, finishing in 2 minutes and 52 seconds. Shino followed closely, his calculated movements reducing his time to 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The improvement across the board was incredible. Shikamaru, usually lazy, now moved with surprising quickness and managed to knock out a time of 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Choji was next. His physical strength and endurance got him to finish in 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Sakura and Ino had become decently better, and it showed when both of them posted a time of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. As the gauntlet continued, the performances kept getting better. Sasuke finished in a respectable 2 minutes and 30 seconds, his movements fluid and fast, his earlier impatience tempered by a sense of calm. But the real surprise came when Naruto took his turn. Despite all the teasing, despite all the setbacks, he managed to finish the gauntlet in 2 minutes and 36 seconds, his best time by far. By the time the last student finished, all had made it under 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The improvements were evident. I couldn't help but feel pleased. This was exactly what I wanted. This wasn't just a test of speed or strength. It was a measure of their growth over the year. And they had all exceeded expectations. "Well done, everyone," I said, clapping my hands together. "You've all improved so much, I'm impressed. But don't relax just yet. You've got a theory test to complete, and Irika will be handling that." A few groans rippled through the class, but the majority of them were just exhausted from the gauntlet. As they began heading back inside, I turned to Irika, giving him a quick nod. Irika, ever the professional, immediately got to work. He laid out the theory test on the desks and explained the rules. "You have 1 hour and 15 minutes to complete the test. No rushing, and please read each question carefully." There was the usual murmured discomfort as the students sat down, the air thick with the tension of impending exams. Some of the students, like Sasuke and Sakura, seemed to settle into their work quickly. Others, like Kiba, looked like they would rather be anywhere but here. I watched as the students worked through the test. Some breezed through it with ease, while others, like Naruto, seemed to struggle more than usual. The boy was, as always, a bit too impatient. He would scribble down an answer, only to go back and rethink it later. But my eye was focused on one man, Mizuki. Mizuki had been in and out of class throughout the year, always lurking in the background, pretending to help but never quite doing anything. I knew he had an ulterior motive, so I kept an eye on him, making sure he didn't tamper with the test papers, especially when it came to Naruto. I knew that Naruto's unpredictable nature could easily be manipulated if Mizuki wasn't kept in check. I watched him closely as he moved around the classroom, his eyes darting over the students' shoulders. It was subtle, but I could see the signs. He was trying to get a peek at Naruto's answers, perhaps thinking he could influence the results. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I walked up to Mizuki, standing next to him for a few moments before leaning in casually. "Everything going well, Mizuki?" I asked, my voice low. He gave a tight smile, trying to mask his discomfort. "Of course. Just making sure the students are on track." "I'm sure," I replied with a smile. "But remember, you're here to assist, not to meddle." He didn't respond, but I could see the silent anger building inside him. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. I knew I had his measure. The hour passed, and the students finished one by one. Irika started collecting the papers, handing half of them to Mizuki to grade. I knew Mizuki wouldn't give an honest grading, so I decided to step in. "You can handle it, Mizuki?" I asked innocently. He looked at me, irritation flickering in his eyes, but he kept his composure. "I've got it covered, Shido." I gave him an unperturbed smile. "I insist." Mizuki seated silently, but he wouldn't dare argue in front of the students. We marked the papers together, with Irika occasionally glancing at the scores. Everyone passed. Some barely, like Naruto and Kiba, but they all made it through. Once the papers were done, Irika smiled. "All right, the last thing we need to do is the taijutsu bouts. Head outside, everyone." Outside, Irika called for volunteers. "Who wants to go first?" Hands shot up, eager to land a hit on me. I couldn't help but smirk. I had been through enough of these battles to know what to expect. First up was Sasuke. Irika initiated the match, and Sasuke approached me with a more stable control over his movements than before. His speed had improved, and he was a little more composed. I could see his techniques becoming more refined. Sasuke feinted a right hook, using the momentum to launch a high-spinning left kick. I stepped forward, catching his body mid-kick, neutralizing the attack. He tried to use my arm for leverage to land a roundhouse kick, but I effortlessly dodged it, letting the air whiz by. Sasuke didn't back down. He lunged at me, throwing a series of punches. I dodged them easily, noting that his precision had improved drastically. As he lunged for another strike, I caught his fist and shifted my weight, throwing him over my shoulder. He landed on his feet, but before he could retaliate, Irika called, "Time!" I placed a hand on Sasuke's shoulder. "You've improved a lot, Sasuke." He gave me a quiet nod and returned to the group, his eyes filled with quiet determination. I could tell he believed that he had almost had me that time. Then, it was Naruto's turn. As always, Naruto grinned and declared, "Let's skip to the part where I win." The class laughed, but I shot them all a stern look. I didn't tolerate any form of bullying in my class. Irika started the match, and Naruto came at me, moving unpredictably, throwing punches, kicks, and surprise attacks. I dodged, redirected, and deflected them all. But then, as always, Naruto got creative. He faked a kick, but then tumbled over himself, rolling in front of me. I couldn't help but flinch in concern, but that was when Naruto's real plan kicked in. He used the momentum from his roll to leap up, aiming a devastating uppercut right at my face. I grabbed his arm just in time, twisting him in the air and making his punch barely miss. But Naruto wasn't done. In a last-ditch effort, he swept his foot behind him, sending his sandal flying toward my head. I tilted my head, eyes closed, letting the sandal sail by and miss my face entirely. "Nice try," I said, holding Naruto down with one arm. But then, as Irika was about to declare the match in my favor, something unexpected happened. The sandal that had flown by came back, as gravity took its toll, and it landed softly on my head. The entire class went silent. Irika stared at me, then at the sandal, and then back at me. "Wait, that counts," Irika said, clearly unsure. I chuckled, pulling the sandal off my head. I never specified how they should hit me, just that they did. Naruto let out a triumphant cheer. "I did it. Shido-sensei, you owe me an ultimate taijutsu lesson." The class erupted in laughter, some of them groaning at the technicality. As the bell rang, Irika smiled. "All right, everyone, you earned it. The semester's over. Go home early today, but remember, practice your basics over the break." The students cheered and began to file out, excited to be free. As I stood there watching them go, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They'd come so far in just 1 year, and in the back of my mind, I knew they still had so much more to learn. But for now, it was time to let them rest. Chapter 11. The Star Beast Fist. Shido returned home after his long day at the academy. With a flicker of chakra, his body vanished from the air and reappeared in an instant inside his secret basement. It was a place few knew of, and fewer still had seen. Deep beneath the earth, hidden from prying eyes, the basement was his sanctuary, his private training ground. The room was dimly lit by a single, flickering lantern. The floor was covered in tatama mats, and the walls were adorned with training weapons, ranging from wooden staffs to iron-tipped kunai. But it wasn't the weapons that caught Shido's attention. It was the hours of practice of trial and error that had led him to this point. With a focused breath, Shido removed his cloak and stepped onto the mat, his body warm from the exertion of the day. He had spent a year refining his techniques, fusing the best elements of both the Hashinryu Taijutsu and the Shinjuki movement style into something new, a style that would carry his legacy forward. A slight smirk curled on his lips as he stood in the center of the room, remembering how much effort it had taken to reach this moment. The techniques he had honed over the years were now seamlessly integrated into his movements. No longer did he have to think about the individual styles. They flowed naturally as one. "It's time," Shido muttered to himself. He closed his eyes, visualizing each step, each strike, each stance. This was the culmination of his effort, the Star Beast Fist. The Hashijikin, Hashtag ultimate SSS rank taijutsu. Star Beast Fist. The Star Beast Fist was no mere taijutsu style. It was a philosophy, a way of being, a combination of the divine precision of Hashinryu and the brutal power of Shinjukyu, two philosophies of combat merged into one devastating technique. It was a high-risk, high-reward style that relied on the perfect balance of mind and body, speed and force. Shido began to move, his body flowing like water. He shifted between the celestial beast stance and the predator's crouch, feeling the balance in his legs, the readiness in his core. His hands were poised for the next move, ready to strike. He could feel the divine guidance, the perfect timing of each movement, and at the same time, the ferocity of a beast instinctively ready to pounce. It was like nothing he had ever felt before. Star barrage, he whispered, his body flowing into the high-speed barrage of strikes. His hands blurred as they rained down blows on the air before him, each strike precise, targeting the vital points: throat, ribs, joints. The strikes were fast, a blur to anyone watching. As his body moved, afterimages seemed to linger in the air, overwhelming anyone caught in the onslaught. Beast's claw, he continued, performing a clawed punch that tore through the air. The precision and power in his movement were unparalleled. He could feel the strike tearing through the invisible target as though it were flesh. Shido paused, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. The sweat on his brow gleamed under the lantern light, but he was calm. Heaven's breath strike, his body surged forward, delivering a punch with such force that the air seemed to crack with its impact. He imagined the devastating effect it would have had on an opponent's defenses. As the movements began to come naturally to him, Shido's mind shifted to defense. The Heaven's Guard technique flowed seamlessly, a perfect deflection that put him in position for a counterattack. The final, devastating technique was something Shido reserved only for the most dire situations: Cosmic Beast Awakening. The ultimate move, the culmination of everything, the combination of divine clarity and primal instinct, a technique that could obliterate an enemy in seconds but left a heavy toll on the body. Shido could feel his body light up as his instincts took over, reacting without thought, as if the world around him ceased to exist. It was perfect. As his breath steadied, Shido smiled, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. It had taken years, but the results were now evident. The Star Beast Fist was his creation, and it was flawless. Shido knew, however, that this technique wasn't for the average shinobi. It was an SSS rank technique, reserved for the elite. His gaze lingered on the floor beneath him, the quiet certainty of his thoughts settling in. As for his current level of skill, he didn't hesitate to rank himself. In terms of taijutsu, he mused aloud, I'd say I'm at Midambu level, maybe higher. The thought made him grin, but he quickly remembered the reason for his practice. Naruto had won their class bet, which meant Shido had promised to create a new taijutsu style for him. He had a week to figure out the specifics, and it would take Naruto about 2 months to master it. His thoughts shifted to his students. He could make taijutsu styles for all of them, of course. After all, he was their teacher, but that would have to wait. He had bigger things to focus on. With that, he left the basement, returning to the comfort of his kitchen for a snack. As he prepared a quick meal, his mind wandered back to the Star Beast Fist. Would it be enough to rival the greatest of taijutsu masters? Only time would tell. The sudden sound of a knock on the door broke his train of thought. Shido furrowed his brow and glanced toward the door, cautious. He walked slowly toward it and cracked it open just enough to see who it was. A figure stood there, dressed in black, an Umbu captain. The Umbu didn't say much, only that the third Hokage had requested Shido's presence. With a nod, Shido stepped out and used the body flicker technique to follow the captain. The Hokage tower came into view, and Shido followed the Umbu inside, his steps quiet on the polished stone floors. They stopped before a door, and the Umbu motioned for him to wait. Shido crossed his arms, waiting in silence. Behind the door, an elderly but firm voice spoke. "Come in, Tendishin Shido." With that, the door slowly creaked open. Chapter 12, Meeting the Hokage. The doors to the Hokage's office opened silently before me. As I stepped inside, my eyes immediately scanned the room. There, behind a grand wooden desk, sat the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, looking as composed as always. On either side of the room were groups of people. To my left, I could make out the clan heads, each of them sitting with an air of quiet authority, their faces stern and focused. The Shinobi Council, then, on the opposite side, a group of civilians sat, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. This was a council meeting. The weight of the moment hung in the air, and I realized that this wasn't just a casual meeting with the Hokage. It was something much more important. I bowed my head slightly, adopting the professional posture that had been drilled into me since childhood. Hokage-sama, I greeted, my voice respectful but firm. I am honored to be here. The clan heads noticed the swift transition from my casual demeanor to this formal approach, and I could sense their understanding. They weren't surprised, after all. This was who I was. This was how I operated. I could shift from relaxed to serious in an instant when the situation demanded it. Hiruzen chuckled warmly, his eyes twinkling. It seems that the council has gathered here to discuss the changes you've made to the academy curriculum, he said, his tone light but with an undercurrent of serious intent. They've been very curious about your decisions. I nodded. It was about time they'd called me in, though I was surprised it had taken them a year to summon me, considering I had been teaching the clan heirs for that long. But then again, I suppose they just wanted to see how things panned out before making any judgments. I didn't mind. I had my reasons for not rushing this. Hiruzen continued, clearly prepared for a lengthy conversation. Tell us, Tendashin Shido, he began, his voice calm but authoritative. Why did you insist on teaching at the academy after you were injured and told to recuperate? Was it not your mission to focus on recovering first? I thought about his question for a moment before responding, my tone unwavering. Hokage-sama, I couldn't afford to sit idly by when there was a way for me to contribute to the village. I believe if I couldn't help on missions, the least I could do was help the next generation of ninjas. I knew that I could make a real difference in their development. The room fell silent, murmurs spreading among the council members. I could sense the mix of surprise and respect, but I didn't break my gaze from the Hokage. It wasn't about me. It was about the students I had taken under my wing. They were my priority. After a long pause, Hiruzen gave a slow nod of approval. I see. Your dedication to the next generation is admirable. Thank you, Hokage-sama, I replied, my voice low but earnest. Then came the second question, and I knew this was where the true discussion would begin. Why did you feel the need to change the curriculum? This question came from one of the Shinobi Council members, a man with sharp eyes and a calculating demeanor. What's wrong with the way things have been done? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The truth is, Hokage-sama, I began, speaking directly to the council. The academy's curriculum has been mediocre at best. The students are barely given the tools they need to survive in this world. It's not just about the basics. It's about preparing them for what lies ahead battles real threats. Before I came, the teachers, besides Irika, of course, didn't seem to be putting in the effort. And that's a failure of character, a failure of responsibility. Some of the Shinobi Council members nodded in agreement, including Shikaku, whose thoughtful expression suggested he was processing the same thoughts. You're right, he said, his voice soft but firm. If we don't push them, if we don't challenge them, we're just sending them out into the world unprepared. I could feel the approval in the room. But before I could continue, a sharp voice cut through the tension. But that's precisely the problem, Koharu Yutane, one of the elders said, her voice tinged with skepticism. Your changes will result in a higher passing grade. How do you expect to generate enough ninjas if we make it harder to pass the academy? The civilians, who had been quiet until now, erupted into heated voices. This is outrageous, one of them cried. You want to cripple our village's ability to defend itself. I held my ground, my expression unwavering. Cold air seemed to sweep the room as I locked eyes with Koharu, my voice calm but firm. That's exactly the point, Koharu-sama. I said, my words deliberate. The previous passing bar allowed anyone to pass, regardless of whether they were truly ready. And as a result, we've had young shinobi sent to the field with no proper training, and dying before they even reached adulthood. That's a failure we can't ignore. The council members, including the shinobi, fell silent, the weight of my words sinking in. The civilian council fidgeted, unsure of how to respond, but their anger seemed to have been quelled, at least for the moment. I prefer to pass a small group of elites, I continued, my gaze steady, rather than let a large group of unprepared individuals die for nothing. We need strength, not numbers. Koharu's face softened slightly, her expression thoughtful. After a long pause, she gave a small nod. I see your point. Then came the fourth question. Hamir Midokado, another elder, cleared his throat before speaking. Your files show that you plan to teach for only one more year. Why not stay longer if you care so much about these students' growth? I responded without hesitation. I plan to return to the field. I believe my skills are best suited there, where they can make a direct impact. The room hummed with a low murmur. It was clear that not everyone agreed, but no one challenged my decision. Hiruzen, sensing the tension, chimed in with a thoughtful question. Shido, why do you believe that your skills are best suited in the field? Could you not do more for Konoha by staying as a teacher? I looked at the Hokage, my gaze respectful but unwavering. Because I'm capable, I said simply. The weight of my statement hung in the air, and for a moment, the room went quiet. Everyone was processing the raw confidence that laced my words. Before anyone could respond, a harsh voice broke the silence. I have a question for you, young Tendishin. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Danzo Shimura's presence was as suffocating as always. I stiffened, but kept my demeanor neutral. I had to respect the position, if not the man himself. Danzo leaned forward, his voice low and gravelly. We've heard you've been training a certain brat, he said, his words dripping with disdain. Naruto Uzumaki, if I remember correctly. The council would be furious if you trained him. Why waste your time on him, when you could be training one of our heirs? I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, but I maintained my composure. My voice was cold, my eyes unblinking. Danzo-sama, I said, faking respect, I made a bet with my class. If anyone could land a hit on me before the semester ended, I would create a taijutsu style specifically for them. Naruto won, albeit on a technicality. Danzo's mouth opened to retort, but before he could, Hiruzen cut him off, his tone final. That's enough, Danzo. We don't need to discuss this further. The room went silent, and I could see the civilian council seething. But Hiruzen had already moved on, giving me a new directive. Shido, I have a mission for you. I nodded. I was no stranger to assignments, even in this new life. I'm listening, Hokage-sama. You will stay at the academy as a teacher until your class graduates. That should be about 3.5 years from now. During that time, I want you to continue your work with the students, and I expect you to contribute to Konoha in any way you see fit. I stood tall, a sense of duty surging through me. Understood. I accept the mission. With that, Hiruzen slammed his hand on the desk, signaling the end of the meeting. This meeting is adjourned. The civilian and shinobi councils filed out of the room, murmuring among themselves, but I didn't pay them any mind. My focus was on the task ahead. As I walked out of the Hokage's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger. The weight of the village's expectations was heavy, but it was a weight I was ready to carry.